my name is Courtney Lazar, and I'm based down in the Florida Panhandle near Destin, Panama City Beach. I have a almost 2-year-old son. He will be 2 in September. His name is Luca. And I have another little boy on the way in December. So we have another one that we're adding to the clan. And I'm a business owner as well. So I have been running my business for 5.5, almost 6 years in December. And I work from home, and I have been working 1 day a week since 2021. So it'll be 2 years in September,
Which
which is
is
crazy. Yeah.
Yes. And people are all like, wait, how is she doing that? And she didn't even mention, but she has a multiple 6-figure a year business.
Yes.
And so it's like, that's also, Courtney does not have a cute side hustle, which those are great too.
Yeah.
And my business started as a cute side hustle, but it's like you've built like a very successful business.
Yeah, we run an agency now, and we have a team and all the things. So it's a fully fledged business at this point, which is also crazy because I didn't even think I'd survive the first year, but here we are miraculously, and still able to keep everything running while getting to be mom. So it's worked out perfectly for life and how life changed. So
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, Luca is almost 2, and we said this in the last episode, but Luca and Colin are 3 weeks apart. So we
yes.
just like have all the mom stuff in common. And I'm like right in that same season as you. But I know something that has always like drawn me to you as another business owner is that we both have, I know a lot of listeners do too, but this like common desire to build our businesses with life in mind first. So not being like, business is everything. I'm going to fit in these other things like in the hours I can, and as much time I can put to my business is the goal. And so you're just really intentional with your business. But my question for you is like, have you always felt like you were that way from the start? Or is it that since having Luca and then being pregnant again with the second baby, like how has that all changed?
I think I was definitely more like that at the beginning, and it evolved, but kind of like what I talked about in our previous podcast episode on like how I got started with my business. A lot of it boiled down to like not feeling fulfilled in what I was doing and how I was living my life on a day-to-day basis. Like, the whole concept of like, oh, you need to be sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day, even if you got done with your work in 3 hours. And I was just like, man, this is not what I want. And so when I first started my business, it was, I want location independence because I want to be able to travel and go do all the fun things. And I want to be my own boss because I want to be effective and useful with my time. And I want to also be in control of what I earn. And so those were big 3 contributing factors as to why I started my business. But then I had Luca. So I met my husband, we got married, bought a house, settled down in Florida. And then we had Luca, and life completely changed, right? It completely changed. And the good thing about business and what is great about being a business owner is you get to choose what your business looks like. You get to decide if, hey, do I want my business to look a certain way? How many hours do I want to work? What is feasible for me? And I was able to transition into a role in my business that better met the needs of my personal life. And if, it's kind of funny because like when I looked back, 5.5, 6 years ago, I didn't have any idea that the decision I was making at the time was going to lead so perfectly into setting myself up for being able to be home with my son and still contribute financially to my family. And it did. It just worked out. And so I made that decision because, to cut back, because it was important for me to be able to spend more time with my son and be home. And childcare is insane. It's the prices of childcare is so high. And I knew that was something, that I just, ever to each their own with their decision making and what they want to do. And that's perfectly fine. For us, it was just like, I just don't really, that's a lot of money. And I would rather find a way around it. And so that was kind of what we did and why we started to make that pivot. So.
Yeah, I love how you said that it was like, you didn't necessarily know that these early business decisions would end up being like impacting you so well in motherhood.
Yeah.
I feel that same way when I look at my business of like, oh yeah, like I knew that was like a goal for these things to like collide well in a certain way, but you don't really know until you're like in it how that like actually will look.
And I'm so thankful for it. I look back and I'm like, thank you for sticking it out when it was hard, because it's paid back tenfold now at this point in time. So
yeah. So, okay, you work 1 day a week.
yes.
And let's like get into like all the nitty gritty of it. I have lots of follow-up questions, but I guess just like tell everyone what that day usually looks like for you. And is it like is it literally one day on like on the 7 days of the week, or is it like split into like two chunks that like kind of equal a work day?
It is literally one day. It is Wednesdays. That is my one day. My husband, he has off. And so he's home with our son, and they have a daddy son day, which they love. And it's so cute and adorable. And, they go get into all kinds of trouble. And so I work one day a week. Now we do have, we found somebody in our neighborhood who was able to watch Luca at her house with her little girl for 2 to 3 hours on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings. If I'm feeling strapped, or if like we're in a really busy season, if I want to sit down and get caught up on anything, I'll use that time. But mostly we also, have a home and all those things that comes with taking care of your home, and laundry and cleaning and, grocery shopping and running errands that I have to make sure that I'm spending enough time or having time to be able to do as well. So that's what it's looked like right now. Is I work Wednesdays are my work days. And that's it. So.
Yeah. And you're right that it's like, so, we think about like, oh, I'll get childcare these days and then I'm going to like work the rest of the time. It's like, there's also other stuff you have to do that maybe you're not going to do when you're taking care of your kids. So I feel that sometimes I'm using childcare time to like catch up on other things around the house or do other things that you enjoy besides like work and parenting type stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's the same day every week. And and you're adding in possibly on those other days with your team. Cause I want to talk about your team stuff actually. Could you, well, I guess my first question is, are you available to them on the other days? Or is it like, no, I'm only kind of available on these 3 days-ish, or during like nap time, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there was a period of time where I would check into Slack once in a while, like throughout the week, like if Luca was napping, or, if he'd gone down for bed, I'd go in to respond if I saw questions. But recently, actually, especially just because I am pregnant with our second little boy. And if for anybody that's had a kiddo, first trimester can be rough, and thankfully it wasn't terrible, but you still have this period of like total exhaustion. And it was I kind of had to take a little bit of a step back my first trimester, just to, I've got a toddler to take care of too, and somehow survive myself. And so for that, it was really, I was starting to feel like a little inundated with Slack. I was feeling like this pull to go check Slack when I needed to be present with my family. And so what I did is I have an ops manager on my team. Her name is Hannah. And I sent a voice message over to Hannah. I'm like, hey, Hannah, I see all these Slack messages coming through. I'm feeling like, are you guys feeling like I'm not getting your responses quickly enough? Like with the entire team, very transparent and always an open line of communication. Like I always want them to feel honest and be able to come to me with any issues or questions, comments, concerns that they ever have. It's an open door policy. And so I came to her and expressed how I was feeling, that like, oh man, like am I letting you guys down? Like, how are you doing? How can we make this better for everyone? Because we also have a Slack channel where we do team weekly check-ins, where it's like a templated message. They drop that message in every Friday. But the problem with how the timing of that was happening was there is a section in that templated messages that says things needed from Courtney. And so there are very specific things that they need from me that they drop in on a Friday. But if I'm not working until Wednesday, I'm not seeing it until Wednesday. Or I would feel the need to go in the evening on the weekend to go see if they needed anything from me, and then to go respond. And so it just wasn't working great. But what has happened now is, because I know I'm expecting a second one, Hannah is going to be shifting more into a leadership role. And so how it's working is, if you were to like envision an org chart, you've got myself up at the top, Hannah's right in underneath me, and then all the other departments and team members fall in underneath that. And so Hannah is more so migrating into, like, if the team has questions, they go to Hannah. If Hannah isn't positive on something, then Hannah comes to me. And so Hannah and I have bi-weekly check-in meetings where if stuff comes up, she can bring them there. But she also just created a really cool project submission process and ClickUp for me, because I was feeling like, when I'd come in and log on to Slack, I'd see all these messages. And I'm like, okay, what's most important and who needs me first and what is due first? And she made a project submission form so the team can submit anything that they need from me, like feedback, can you complete this? Can you do this? And it organizes it into a ClickUp project by due date across the top and then in order of urgency. So I know when I come in every single Wednesday, that's the first thing I'm going to do is I go into this project, I see everything the team needs from me. It's in order of urgency and when I need to complete it. And then it's also tagged with the time estimate they think it'll take me to complete or review it, so that I'm like, okay, this task is only going to take me like 10 or 15 minutes to respond on. This one might take more of an hour, so that I'm able to more effectively manage my time during the day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's amazing. So she's setting that all up for you just during the in-between time between your workday, and then you're just diving into it first thing.
And then obviously we have a protocol for if like there's an emergency, right? Like, and we obviously have a process for that too. We have a crisis management system inside of ClickUp where like if X happens, this is like the process we follow. It's kind of like if you think back when there was snow days and there was calling trees, okay, something happened. We have to notify everybody. It's kind of like the same process. It's like, okay, our website went down. These are the things that has to happen. Here's who needs to be notified. Our team does not share our phone numbers with one another. It's just, we don't ever text, we don't ever call. We keep it work-life balance. But in certain scenarios in that crisis system, that would be the only time we're allotted to use each other's phone numbers.
So it has everyone's phone numbers in that system. Interesting. Yep. How often do you have a crisis?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
Very rarely. We had one where our I don't know how it happened, but I didn't have our domain set to auto renew and it canceled and our whole website went down. And it was just like a whole process to get it back up because it was between two different platforms and it was a mess. So we learned from that one. We set up a very thorough crisis response system for that. But other than that, I think we've done a really good job in creating processes and guidelines for how to respond in certain situations with clients and things like that, to where she feels like she has the tools and resources she needs to appropriately respond without having to run it by me.
Yeah. Do you see you and Hannah as like the visionary, and I'm really forgetting the traction model, you know what I'm talking about? What's the person, why am I in Rocket Fuel? What's
the implementer?
Is that what the word is?
I don't know what the word is, an implementer, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm like, why am I blanking on this? And I have that book and it's not on my bookshelf. I'm like, otherwise I would like probably see it on there. Anyway, someone's going to message us and be like, this was the name of the person or the name of that role. But are you like following that model in it, or are you more like something different than that?
Yeah. I mean, we've read Traction, the whole team, like whenever they onboard, they get Traction, a couple other different books that they can read through. So we're all very familiar with Traction and like Rocket Fuel and a couple other like books in terms of like the EOS system. But really we've just manipulated the business to function to best serve our needs, right? Like we take again, that's the beauty of business. Like we take pieces of what we like from different things and model it or mold it into what we need to best fit how our business functions.
Yes, it's integrator.
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Or you said implementer, I think?
Integrator, yeah.
Okay, integrator. Yeah, that's what it's called. Okay, so that's great. And I love the system you're saying Hannah and you do together of like in ClickUp, having that agenda. Are there any other ways you're organizing your schedule, or advice for someone else organizing their schedule with limited work hours that you found work really well for you?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we've had to do. I've had to limit the amount of meetings that get put on my calendar, or we'll have like one day a month where I don't have any meetings on my working day, just because my calendar can get really full when I only have 4 days a month that I'm taking calls. I have a podcast. I have to do podcast interviews. I still do discovery or sales calls with our clients and some team meetings. And then obviously some stuff pops up randomly. But what I was noticing is that I was not having enough time to work on like the big picture thinking work that I needed because my day was so full of meetings. And so that is one thing that we did have to cap the number of meetings I was having each Wednesday. But what it's forced us to do is also look at where can team members step in and host, particular meetings. So as an example, today actually, is the quarter wraps up on Friday, and so we have quarterly reviews with our team members. My calendar was jam-packed today. It was like the podcast interviews and then all the team reviews, and we had another one. And I was talking to Hannah about it. I was like, it really probably just makes more sense that she starts hosting the team reviews for the team members like for our ClickUp setup specialists and things of that. And then I host Hannah's team review. So then I only do Hannah's now, and then she does the rest of the team members, and then we'll come together on our biweekly meeting and go over anything that came from it. But that is really the big thing, is just like the big, I wouldn't say I have like a big structure in terms of like what my day looks like every day or every Wednesday, just because it can change depending on what's going on in the business and the needs of the team. But that is the one contingency, is the number of meetings that I allow on my calendar.
Yeah, that is like the realest thing ever. And that is the struggle of my life, is feeling
Yes.
because I have like 3 solid work days, and
Mhm.
I feel like I have too many meetings all the time. I actually did an analysis of a month, a few weeks ago, like looking at the previous month, being like, okay, I feel like I was in a ton of meetings. Like, what actually were these meetings? And let me
Yeah.
categorize them out and be like, which ones are ones that maybe I should have said no to?
Yep.
Which ones were necessary? Why were there so many this month? Why was I feeling like every work day I had at least one meeting? Because it is hard to like get in that focus zone, especially if they're like really spaced out. You each have little tiny gaps where you're trying to like fit stuff in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say there's something to be said for asynchronous communication too, right? Like, nobody really likes to be on meetings, at least not that I'm aware of. If you are, then props to you, but I'm not one of them. And so we really try to have as asynchronous a communication as possible on our team, so that we are being the most efficient with our time in our meetings. And whenever we do have a meeting, that agenda is prepped days ahead of time, and everybody has submitted everything that they need on that agenda ahead of time, so that when we pop on, we have a real clear list of what we need to cover and make it as efficient as possible.
That's good. Yeah. And that's such a huge thing and I think everyone needs to really hear what you just said of like not going into a meeting just because we think we're supposed to meet, or without a very clear agenda, which can be very tempting to do. And
Yeah.
it's okay if maybe the agenda is like, you're trying to get to know this team member better. That could be an agenda on its own. But generally speaking, the agenda needs to be like a reason
Yeah.
for the meeting.
Yeah.
And tools like, our last episode talking about ClickUp and Slack and all these different tools, that really can help cut down meetings, because you can do things like voice memos, and you can use things like Loom to record videos in lieu of a meeting. And that's super, super helpful. How did you decide? So, I mean, gosh, firstly, you like are a great example, which I think everyone listening is probably hearing this, but I just want to say it, of like someone really, really stepping into that CEO role, where you are like, you're showing up as the face of your company, but you're not building a personal brand anymore, really. I don't
Yep.
know. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. We just
Yeah.
actually went through a huge rebrand back in March, specifically for that reason, was
Yeah.
because I could not be the face of the business anymore. Like, it couldn't be a personal brand. It needed to be an agency, and that I have, it's obviously founded by somebody, and then there's a team of people. And so that's what the pivot that we made this year, actually.
Yeah, and that like works great for your life goals, which is
Yeah.
what like we're talking about, being able to like work less and be with your children more. But by stepping to that CEO role, it is like, yeah, like the team is answering to Hannah, and
Mhm.
Hannah's answering to Courtney. So you're not having like a gazillion people asking you questions constantly,
Yeah.
which is where you're going to end up feeling like you need at your level in business, like a lot more time for meetings and a lot more work hours and all that. But
Mhm.
how did you decide which roles and tasks only you can do versus like, oh, this should go to Hannah, or this should go to just like, one of your other team members?
Mhm. That's a good question. So it actually started when I had Luca originally in September of 2021. My original goal was, I'm going to take 8 weeks maternity leave, and then I'm going to ease back in behind the scenes, and then I'll step back into client work. And that was the goal. Well, I had Luca, and my time was coming to an end on my maternity leave, and I was nowhere close to ready to getting back into the swing of things. And just for some context, we don't have family anywhere near us. Like, my husband's family is in Europe, my family's in Missouri. Like, it's just my husband and I. And so that does add a level of complication to like our situation a little bit, because we don't have somebody to call and just be like, hey, can you come watch the kiddo for a little bit, or anything like that. So I would say everything transitioned out of necessity. Number one, it was either, hey, I don't have a business anymore, or I have to find a way to make this work on a very, very limited schedule. And so when we made that transition, I basically made a list of things that I was like, okay, these are the things I'm doing. These are what I would say are an Achilles heel, or like a break in our chain, so to speak, as I don't think I can delegate these things. Now, that is also kind of a limiting belief because it's not that those things can't be delegated. It's that they're scary to delegate or that I'm not comfortable to delegate them, but there is always a why. And obviously, like we're big systems people, and with systems, you have to remove the emotion from what you're thinking and look at it analytically to understand, like, what is the solution to this problem? Remove the emotion. What is the solution? And so when I made that list of the things I was doing in my business, one of the big things, as an example, was sales calls, was discovery calls. And so that was one thing that I knew I wanted to either be able to outsource or eventually train a team member on. And so, we tested some things with that. And we made like guides, like scripts to a discovery call or sales call when I went on my maternity leave, frequently asked questions that clients asked, just trying to give my team as many resources that they would need to effectively be able to respond or answer to things. And so that was really the big thing that I first started doing, was just like compiling a list. I made a list of the things that I didn't think somebody could do. And then I gave for those, I came up with like a solution for why, like what was the reason why and what is the solution to it. So one other example that I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to is client communication. Allowing certain team members or just team in general to be able the main point of contact for your clients was a really, really scary thing for me, because if I didn't think that people would be able to make my clients feel as like taken care of and loved and like understood as I was able to. And so we actually created a client communication SOP or client communication guide on how to draft messages. And Hannah just redrafted this yesterday. So we actually have a brand new one, so that we have some more for like more customer support type of things. So like how to, how to use like positive language versus negative language. And when you're drafting a message, avoiding run on paragraphs and use more bulleted style, like making it very clear with expectation. So there's a whole process to it, right? And now they have all the tools that they need to be able to go and do those things. And I trust that they can do that because they have the resource to do so. So that's kind of like a long-winded answer to your question, but that's how we got started, and like identifying what I could work on, how I could pass the baton to Hannah. Obviously, there was a big like line of communication that I had to keep open with Hannah to make sure that I had a pulse on what she felt comfortable with, because that's the other thing too, is like I want to make sure I'm not putting her in a position where she's, scared or nervous or anxious to be doing something. I want her to feel like she's in a good environment and comfortable with her role too. So
Yeah, that's great. And how many team members do you have at this point?
we have 4.
Okay. And are they contractors or W-2, or how are you setting that up?
They're all contractors as of right now. That's not to say it won't change down the line, but as of right now, everybody's a contractor.
And are there other contractors you're working with outside the 4 that are doing like other things, like, for example, like editing your podcast or uploading blog posts or social media and things like that? Or is it really just like y'all are these 4 people?
It's just us 4. We try to keep things as in-house as possible. Before we ever started our podcast, we actually we had somebody on the team learn how to edit podcast episodes, and then we created SOPs. And so everything that we do is in-house now. So, there's very, rare instances where we may outsource, maybe eventually down the line, since we are an agency, that we would outsource with a sales agency for helping to handle more of like a sales and acquisition process if the growth allowed. And, for right now, everything is just in-house.
Yeah. That's crazy that you're in-house for everything. I feel like you don't hear that often, especially when something like contracting, like podcast editing.
Yeah.
With that, like training a team member to do something like that that's so technical, do you feel like how do you feel about the idea of like, oh yeah, they might leave, but you just taught them how to, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's always a possibility, right? Like it's always a possibility somebody can leave, but that's why we have systems and processes in place in case somebody does, is we have a Loom video for every step of the process. And so we have, if Hannah or Haley or anybody on the team left, then we have everything we need to slot somebody into that spot really easily. Now, that's not to say like, hey, we might have to pause the podcast for a couple of weeks, or, something where we might have to do like a little damage control, so to speak. But we have everything built into a process enough that it's easy to like have other people step in when it's necessary.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you feel like keeping things in-house is cutting costs for you
Yeah.
overall, or do you think it's more costing more because you're specializing everyone a bit in a
Yeah,
lot of things?
so I would say it's mostly cutting costs. And that's one of the big reasons too that we do that is because as an agency, you really have to pay attention to profitability because with the type of projects that we do, you always have to look at like there's a possibility for project scope creep basically. And
Yeah.
we have to pay attention to certain things like that. And so we have to be very cognizant of where we're spending our time and what we're spending our time on and making sure that it's like helping to move the needle forward with our business. So that's one of the big reasons we do everything in house. But that's not to say, like I said, that there are specialty things like somebody in sales is like they're really good at that, and that's what they thrive at. And that's what in an instance when we would look at specializing in something. Whereas like the podcast editing, like yes, it's a specialization, but it was something technical that we were confident. Like we had a podcast editor come in and create the trainings and create everything for
Cool.
us. So like we had it handed down from a podcast agency to train our team on. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
mhm.
When you look at entrepreneurs, maybe especially even think about agency people trying to grow a team, what are some mistakes you feel like you see entrepreneurs make that we should be aware of to avoid and like trying to build a team successfully?
Yeah. So I would say probably the first thing is hiring in management roles too early. I'd say like the best roles that you can hire for first are implementers, like people that can come in and execute tasks in your business. And the reason I say that is because I used to be an OBM years ago. And when I started to really focus on systems, what I noticed was that the more efficient systems I built into my business, the less and less hours I was needed because the systems were functioning from almost like a management perspective. Like if you go into
Yeah.
ClickUp, like you can see more of like that overview of what's going on in your business. And so I'd say like a lot of people think like, oh, my first hire needs to be an OBM, or like my second hire needs to be an OBM, but really yes. I mean, obviously I have an ops manager on my team. She is like one of the reasons my business functions now. But those first couple of hires need to be the doers, the implementers, the executors that, they get stuff done and they move the needle forward. And then from that point, once you have the ability to hire a manager and you see the growth then it's needed, then you could come in and have somebody manage.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, we can often feel like we need a manager when really you need to manage that part of it. And
Yeah.
like you need a doer to like do the stuff that you're then managing. Yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah.
Okay. So to talk about again, the mom life and you being like a stay-at-home mom and the other days that you're not running your very successful business. I have a kind of weird question with it. And then I want to talk about like for people who are like, oh, I want that too, where they should start.
Yeah.
But for you, why not just do what most women are doing of just hiring more childcare?
Yeah. I think it just kind of boils down to personal preference. For us too, like we live in a small town, small community. There's not a lot of childcare options down here, number one. Number two, it's super expensive. And it just for us financially, I was like, it just doesn't make sense for us to pay that much. I mean, and we live also it's a small community, but it's also a very touristy, wealthy area that is we're very close to the beach. So you think about the big beach houses, obviously we don't have one of those, but that's the area that we live. And so because of that, prices down here are just crazy, like groceries even. So childcare prices are even more expensive down here than average. And so childcare just, paying for that was just not something that we felt comfortable with, I guess. And I also just knew for myself I wanted to be home. I wanted to, I wanted to be able to spend time with Luca. I didn't want to miss anything. Like I just couldn't fathom the thought of it. And so that's why I said what I did about like didn't keeping my business. I mean, that's obviously what I wanted, but if it boiled down to it, I would have chosen to give up my business versus, the situation I have right now thankfully worked out. But it was just, I think it's personal preference and just because I wanted to be able to spend time and be present with Luca. So
Yeah, I totally relate to all of that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for someone listening who's thinking, I really want that too, maybe they're thinking, I want to scale my business, scale down my business and
Mhm.
scale down childcare and be home more, or someone who's like pregnant right now and anticipating how that's going to change their business, what are some maybe steps or just like where they should start in planning towards kind of what you're doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a good example. I mean, thankfully, we had already done the prep work because I had already had Luca. But now that I'm expecting a second baby, we're kind of going back to the drawing board a little bit and just making sure that we've got everything covered so that when I am out of office, like everybody's good to go. And we actually have a freebie on our website that this directly relates to. It's how to stop doing the stuff that you hate in your business, which it's also really just, it's about like how to eliminate the things that aren't working in your business, but it applies to wanting to go on an extended leave. We also have a course actually on taking an extended leave, but the main concept to everything in that is we want to focus on what I'm doing and we want to make a plan for how to transition it to somebody else's plate or have a game plan to be able to pause it. And so we use ClickUp, like we talked about obviously in our first podcast episode, and we build this all out in a project in ClickUp, and it's called like a transition timeline or like whatever you want to call it. But I go through and I make a list of all my tasks or my responsibilities. I make a list of who is going to, if I'm going to delegate it when I'm out of office, if I'm going to pause or end it, and then if I'm going to find a way to automate it. And then from there, we go in and I have a team member assigned to the ones I'm going to delegate. So if like, hey, I'm going to delegate this one, Hannah's going to take this over after I go on maternity leave. And so we go through and make a plan. And then we also choose like, okay, here's a start date for your training. Here's the date that we're going to officially assign this over to you. And I always give some leeway so that I'm present when they take the task over. So if they have questions when they're doing it, then we can go from there. But we basically create a plan, a takeover plan, and ClickUp and execute.
That's awesome. And with this maternity leave, when you're second, I know you said you took 8 weeks last time. Are you planning to do anything like different that you learned like didn't work well from the first pregnancy?
Taking a longer one for sure. I think my mistake last time was at least I planned to not have a plan, but when I came back last time, I didn't have like any structure, like my one day that I was dedicated to work or anything like that. And I was just spreading myself too thin. So when I was going in for like Luca was down for a nap, I would try to pop in for work. And then it just wasn't working. And it was more overwhelming than anything. So I think I'm going to extend my leave a little bit, but also just like I've got a little more structure and I've done it. So like this time around, thankfully I kind of know what to anticipate when I come back. Obviously things could be different too when I have 2 kiddos versus 1, but we at least have an idea of like how and the team is used to it at this point. They're used to working if I'm not around and still being able to execute. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that planning. Okay, let's do a few rapid fire questions to close us out. So, what is your favorite ClickUp template in your shop that maybe listeners of this episode should check out?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably our lead management tracker. So we create like a lead capture pipeline inside of ClickUp that also can convert to an active client pipeline. And I feel like it's a really good I really love that one just because I can see all of our leads coming in. I can see where they're at in process. And then when they get converted to a client, I can see where all of that is. And so I think that's probably one of my favorite ones is the lead and client tracker or management tracker.
That's super helpful. Okay. In the last few years, maybe even think about just since you become a mom, what have you been better at saying no to, as in like different things like distractions and stuff like that you're better at saying no to?
Everything. What I mean by that is like, I feel like when you become a mom, like you have this more like natural, like mama bear instinct that comes in that makes it easier for you to set boundaries, so to speak. And so when I started seeing things that were maybe like not making the best impact on our personal life or for our family, or if I just felt like, okay, by adding this to my plate, I'm feeling spread way too thin for my family and I'm not showing up as the best version of myself, then that was like an indicator for me that like, okay, this is a no. A lot of it comes down to meetings. Like I can't just do like, I've got a schedule with the toddler. I mean, for the most part, like as much as you can have a schedule. And like, there's things that I can and cannot be available for. And that just is what it is. And so that's either where I either have to say no or somebody on the team would be, have to step in if they're able to do that. So
yeah, it's hard saying no to stuff like that.
It is.
Saying no to people asking to meet. and like discerning what makes sense and what doesn't. That is something that is a skill and a strategy to pay attention to, especially if you can relate to what I was saying earlier of like feeling like you just have too many meetings. Like you need to analyze which of these makes sense. What do you need to cut? Or maybe it's not meetings, it's something else you're doing. Super helpful. Okay. What is a purchase of $100 or less that's positively impacted you in the last 6 months?
I talked to you about this. I know before we record the podcast, my first reaction was like, we had just got a new washer and dryer, and it's been like such a game changer because we just had the one that the house came with when we bought it. But then I saw that it had to be under $100, and I actually had to go back on my Amazon and like look like what have, because I don't really shop that much, to be totally honest. Groceries would be a great one. Just spend my money on groceries. But I actually bought it's like a car organizer for it hangs over the back seat of the driver's side chair where my son's car seat is, because he has all of his toys and his books, and like we take snacks and water bottle, all that good stuff. And so it organizes all of his toys and stuff, so it's not just like scattered all over the floor in my car. And from the type A systems person that I am, I'm sure that's a very like typical response for my choice, but it really has made a game changer because it's really helped keep my car clean.
Yeah, I need something like that. We're like toys all over the place in our car.
Same.
So yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Courtney, this was so wonderful. I feel like I could, again, ask you like way more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time and so appreciative of you doing 2 podcast interviews when this is like your one day.
So excited to chat with you. And I love like this stuff is so fun. Like I love having conversations with you in general. So I'm glad we were able to finally pop on and do some podcast episodes and go from there.
Yeah. So tell everyone where they can find you and connect with you.
Yeah. So you can find me on our website. It's wearesystemsup.com. And we have an Instagram handle at wearesystemsup. And we're on both spots. And we have a free circle community as well. So I'll make sure you guys have the link to that with Elizabeth. And then we can go from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You are so welcome. And thanks everybody for listening. And we'll chat maybe on Instagram.